Good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be with you this afternoon for this very special occasion. Celebration of the 25th year of the Institute for Faith and Learning. I'm Darren Davis. I'm the director. It's been my great honor to serve as the director since 2008. I cannot tell you what it means to me to be able to look out among this group and see so many faces that have encouraged the work of the Institute for Faith and Learning. Many of you since its inception in 1997, many more recently, just in the last few years. We thought it was really important to commemorate 25 years of the work of the Institute. We also recognized that we'd not done that before. Not only had we not turned 25 before, but in all of our doing and working, we probably hadn't taken enough opportunity to give gratitude and celebrate, and also just to be in the company of people for whom we have served and cared about for so many years, and whose work and devotion has been such a blessing to us. So welcome. We wanted to do a panel this afternoon. We'll have a lecture this evening, but we wanted to do a panel devoted to the question of the next 25 years of faith and learning, something that could be both present and future oriented in its reflection. And we wanted to frame the ideas around the ways in which church-related higher education or Christian higher education, whatever taxonomy we want to adopt here, might shape and inform three spheres of life: culture, church, and university, realizing that those overlap in all kinds of ways, but knowing that even since IFL's inception in 1997, IFL has never been just about Baylor. It's certainly been about faculty formation at Baylor. It's certainly been about student formation at Baylor, but our mission really from the beginning was to lift up as we could the pursuit of ideas and to do that in a way that would be a faithful stewardship for other institutions, and that might also extend our conversation and our reach and also our reception of ideas beyond Baylor as well. So I wanted to have sort of three people who I admire a lot and who all three know and have participated in the work of the Institute for Faith and Learning in some way over the years, to speak to these three spheres, each in their own way, one on culture, one on church, one, broadly speaking, on university. So I'd like to introduce them now, and they'll offer their beginning reflections, after which time we'll engage them in some conversation among one another, and then we'll have conversation with you all as well. So to my far right and to your left is the Reverend Dr. Michael A. Evans, Sr., who is pastor of Bethlehem Baptist Church in Mansfield, Texas, where he has served for more than 30 years. He was a reserve chaplain in the United States Navy as a commissioned officer. Pastor Evans serves as a consultant on race relations for church, county, and state officials, and is a passionate advocate for the city of Mansfield. In particular, he is the mayor of Mansfield, Texas. He's also founded several organizations that work for the betterment of individuals and the community, including the Bethlehem Baptist Church Educational Enrichment Corporation, Hope House Community Service Network, and the historic West Mansfield, Texas Community Development Corporation. He's a native of Houston, undergraduate from the University of Texas at Arlington, master's in divinity from Bright Divinity School, and D-Min at Baylor's George W. Truett Theological Seminary, where he was supervised by our dear friend Dr. Ron Cook. Married to Lisa Evans, his high school sweetheart of more than 34 years, 2 children, and he is very proud of a granddaughter that he has, Michael Evans. In the middle is Thomas Smith, who is Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, as well as Ordinary Professor. There's nothing ordinary about you, Tom. Ordinary Professor in the Department of Politics at Catholic University of America. He's the winner of several departmental and university-wide teaching awards. He's published in some of the leading journals in the nation, including the American Political Science Review, the Review of Politics, Polis, the Journal of Politics and Polity. He's the author of Revaluing Ethics, Aristotle's Dialectical Pedagogy. He and his wife have 3 children. He lives in Chevy Chase, Maryland. I got to know Tom several years ago. In fact, we were trying to count up the number of years ago where he came to be a speaker at our Crane Scholars Program. And we had some great visits, and you were wonderful with our cranes. And finally, closest to me, is Ann Snyder, who I got to know, and we were really blessed by her presence last year at our symposium on accountability. She writes and speaks extensively about drawing on wisdom and the other virtues to address the major crises of our time, including community fragmentation, political polarization, and racism and inequality. She's the editor-in-chief of Comment Magazine. You all have copies of Comment Magazine around the table. They are for you. And if you would like more, we will see that we get those to you. You ran out of the friendship issue. Okay, that says a lot. It was a really terrific issue. She's the host of the Whole Person Revolution podcast. She's the host of Breaking Ground, a web commons that brings together diverse thinkers and practitioners to respond to pressing problems. She's the author of The Fabric of Character. She also worked for several years to a foundation that's very near and dear to our heart, the H.E. Butt Family Foundation, as well as the Urban Reform Institute and the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Will you please join me in welcoming these 3? So we thought we might begin with Tom and taking up this question about the way in which church-related or Christian higher education might speak into and shape and also be formed by larger trends and practices in higher education.
Thanks, Darren. It's a pleasure to be with you, and just what a joy it is to participate in this event, celebrating the 25th anniversary of something that I've really long admired. You know, I had a bit of a cold before I got on the flight, and my wife said to me, "That's okay, when you go to Baylor, you always come back rejuvenated," and I do. It's an amazing place. I have such fond feelings for friends here and such admiration for the programs that you run, and certainly IFL is one of them. So for the last couple of years, I've been in higher education for about 30 years. In the last couple of years, I have been writing a book called something like, the working title is something like Majoring in Life, A College Guide to Adulting. And I came to this book about 5 years ago because in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, I've noticed that young people are having a harder and harder time walking over the threshold from late adolescence to mature adulthood. So this has been on my mind. I'm married to a child psychologist. Our professional lives really are about helping young people flourish. And I was disturbed starting about 7 or 8 years ago, seeing that project was vexed, more and more vexed for young people. And so I feel like in some ways I've been kind of an anthropologist going out into the field looking at this odd tribe of college people, and now a lot of you were involved with this, but for those who aren't, I can come back and report kind of what I've found from my time among this group. And this is the way I'd like to focus my remarks. College, I think, is a rite of passage for young people. They're expected to go in as coming out of high school as emerging adults, and they're supposed to come out in some fundamental way as flourishing mature adults, ready to take on the challenges of their life. And I'm saying that's becoming a more and more vexed project. So I want to talk about why I think that is, how it manifests itself, and then what institutions like this can do about it. And in some ways, what I have to say is a commentary, the positive, constructive things, is a commentary on the good work happening at Baylor, at Faith and Learning and Honors College and so on, which I've been inspired by. So let me start with a parable. In this parable, we go back to the 13th century or so. We encounter two young people dragging stones through the mud, doing the same thing. And we go up to the first and say, "What are you doing?" And the person says, "I'm dragging this stone through this awful mud." And we go to the second person and say, "What are you doing?" And the person says, "I'm building a cathedral." They're both building a cathedral in a way, but the first person can't see it. I think this is an instructive parable that suggests something about what's going on in the lives of young people. A meaningful life and a flourishing adult life points to something that transcends yourself, that something outside yourself that you devote yourself to and love, and fidelity, something you find worth sacrificing for. Young people go off to college to get a degree, to find a job, but unless we give them something more, we're just inviting them to roll stones through the mud, in a sense. Life is full of struggle and toil, and they have to lift their sights to something more fundamental. And I think the challenges that I see young people having as I talk to them about the struggles they have becoming adults have something to do with a sense of futility and demoralization around this. What is it for? What am I living for? What is the thing outside myself that I can really devote my life to? And it shows up in all the sort of familiar ways that we see young people struggling. Identity, who am I and what is my life about? They are understandably vexed about the identity question, and they want to belong to something. A sense of stuckness. I know this isn't a sort of an academic term, but I see it all the time. A sense that they're stuck in this period, trying to move over the threshold, and they don't know where to go. The image I have here is sort of a strong swimmer who doesn't know what island to set out for, so they're in the middle of the ocean kind of treading water. And we know a lot of people in their 20s like this, who just can't seem to engage life, even though they have all the skills they need to swim really effectively. And then we see the psychological consequences of this kind of shrinking of horizons. Depression, anxiety, and a culture of distraction and addictive behaviors. This is sort of where the futility I see come from. And a full adult life includes these wider horizons, the sense of obligations to family, to local and political community, to God and the earth. A sense of belonging and place, a sense of purpose, a sense that your work is good work, but you also understand the goods that this good work is serving, so that there's sort of guardrails around work. A flourishing life, adult life, is oriented to what's worthy of devotion and care and love. And academic life has to serve that in addition to getting a job. Switching metaphors now, you could think of the soul like a goldfish. A goldfish grows or shrinks depending on the size of the container it's in. And if we think about college life as a goldfish bowl, what I think is happening is it's in some ways shrinking their horizon, shrinking their sense of what their life should be about. I'm going to unpack this a little bit by talking about two things. Their intellectual life, that will be the most academic part of the talk, so bear with me, and then their social life. And in my experience talking to young people, these are the two things that I keep hitting on. In terms of their intellectual life, I think it's fragmented and disintegrated. Tocqueville, famous American commentator on American life, French commentator on American life, said that the philosophical method of the Americans is Cartesianism. You start with doubt. You say that the real criteria for knowledge is certainty, and then you divide the problem up into smaller bits and attack it with critical reason. What comes out in the wash intellectually, and what's on offer often in higher education, is the standard of knowing becomes what can be measured and quantified. So questions of quantification trump questions of meaning and purpose. That's a shrinking of horizons. You have a curriculum in line with this approach that offers highly specialized, unrelated bits of information that young people have a hard time figuring out how they relate to each other. There's powerful inquiry happening in different disciplines, but they don't see how it comes together. And so it tends to focus them on the stone and not the cathedral. And then truth will be seen primarily as effective or pragmatic, and therefore it will be about career and social activism. Nothing wrong with either one, but they need those wider horizons. So my point is that higher education is not offering a coherent sense of how to understand the universe, society, and their place in it. And that's not an academic point. What we take to be the horizon of our knowing shapes our sense of reality. If something doesn't show up on our intellectual map in a certain fundamental way, it doesn't exist for us. We invite students into a full adult life by asking them to seek these wider horizons. And so our approach to the intellectual life, any approach to the intellectual life that doesn't point them to these wider horizons, expanding their fish bowls, causes them to be deeply confused and stuck. At the same time, we're offering this fragmented, constrained course of intellectual pursuits. Young people are experiencing a rising tide of loneliness. As I talk to young people and as I've written this book, I come back to this over and over and over. They're having a hard time making friends, they're having a hard time dating, and if you look at the statistics, most of them don't hook up, most of them opt out, and most of them don't know how to make a lasting friend. Not necessarily at a place like Baylor, partly because they have this institute, but in higher education generally. My sense is that higher education's approach to their social life is a combination of kind of libertarianism and policing. So on the one hand, typical universities have walked away from in loco parentis, treating students as young adults and claiming that they're indifferent to their choices. At the same time, students' lives are subject to relentless policing around speech, their social lives, their parties. They're policed in ways that would have been unimaginable to me when I was an undergraduate a long time ago. So higher ed in some ways is telling students, we don't care what you do, but you better not step out of line while you do it. And this creates a kind of a stuckness and a demoralization. So the constructive part of my talk, how do we invite our students into wider, more capacious understandings of the possibilities of knowing and loving? That, I think, is the fundamental question for undergraduate life today. How do we invite them into wider circles of communion that integrate their intellectual and social life? Places like Baylor are inspiring because they see faith as a light to see by on this question. They see faith as an opportunity to integrate faith and life and learning. In some ways, I would argue that we're in an analogous position to the ancient Israelites during the Babylonian captivity. The Israelites were disturbed when their children came home from Babylonian parties with Babylonian creation narratives, which said life is all about struggle and violence and suffering. This was the fundamental claim about what's most really real. Creation myths are always about that. What is most really real? And the people of God responded to that, what they took to be a false story, by saying the world is created out of love. I'm not saying that secular institutions of higher education are Babylonian in the sense they're claiming that reality is really struggle and toil. But the implicit message of this curriculum and this life that we're imparting in higher education adds up to the claim that you can't know the world, it's not intelligible, and that it's probably indifferent to you, that it's not good. And so the creation narrative that the Israelites proposed was radical in this claim. The world is both intelligible, it is radically knowable, it stands open to your mind, and it is good, and this is because it was created by a loving, provident God. What are the claims, the implications of that claim for knowing and loving together? That I think is fundamental to the future of the academy in a religiously affiliated institution. And I'll talk about two invitations that Christian higher education should make as a baseline commitment that the Institute for Faith and Learning is already doing. In some ways, this is just a commentary. The first invitation is to a culture of friendship. At root, the gift of creation is an invitation to communion. The generation that we are raising is the least trusting generation in the history of testing trust among the young. And many of the problems that bedevil the academy around speech and around difference are failures in some way of friendship. And all our noses have to be pointed in the same direction in the academy. Student life and res life and campus ministry and academics all need to be rowing their oar in the same boat in the same direction. And one of the things I admire most about Baylor and about this institute is the ways in which it coordinates these activities to get an integrated approach to this question of common life. The second invitation is to a curriculum built around this claim about the radical knowability and goodness of the world. There's a lot of ways up this mountain. We should explore all of them. Not all are Christian, but students have to be invited to see themselves as part of a created world that's a reflection or a manifestation of God's goodness and truth and beauty. We should propose that. We should test it. We should see if it comports with our best understanding of science and psychology and human behavior and so on and so on and so on. It is a proposition to be tested and interrogated. But it has to be proposed as intelligible, at least on the face of it. Those themes should be proposed and investigated across the curriculum in literature and philosophy and history and theology. Students need to be told this story about creation and what follows from it. And you can do this by reading Tolstoy and Shakespeare and the Bible, and also Morrison and Ellison and Achebe. All of them are really important conversation partners. There's lots more to say, of course. All this is easy to say and hard to do. Faith and learning makes it look easy, I would say. And it's been a real inspiration for the programs that I've created in the places that I've served. The Institute for Faith and Learning has been helping young people build cathedrals for 25 years. I congratulate you on all your terrific work and wish you every success for many years to come. Thanks.
Reverend Evans.
All right. Good evening. It is always a blessing to be here at Baylor University. I spent a whole lot of money here, and I am so happy to just see that it is all gone to beautiful structures and all of that good stuff. So I am happy to be in this place. Darren, let me just thank you for the kind of person that you are, the love and the hospitality that you've demonstrated. You do this. For those who may not really know Dr. Davis, this is just who he is, here as well as out in what I would call the local church, the trenches, and we appreciate him. And congratulations on 25 years of the ministerial work of the Institute of Faith and Learning, where you seek to promote and a deeper understanding of the ways in which faith might shape and direct teaching and research. My assignment is to talk about how we marry together the academy and the local church. It is a good thing as we understand the importance of learning, the importance of putting the ideas and the theories on the board, but then there is that next step, I think, that we have to take. When you think about that next step, I'm talking about a mission to marry the academy to the local church community, whereas we understand together that there must be somewhat of a symbiotic relationship, one where the institution should feed and nurture the church, and vice versa, where the church should feed and nurture the institution. I believe that it works both ways. It works both ways because as a local pastor, there is such a great need for us to put together theory and praxis. It is so important because what we know is, in regard to mainline denominations, that we find that we are witnessing an apostasy, a great falling away, so to speak, that has, I would argue, that has been accelerated by the pandemic. We as local pastors, those who are serving in what I would call the trenches, they will tell you, whether it's First Baptist Amarillo, First Baptist, you name it, just fill in the blank. all the way to that small church that's in a rural community where they have almost disappeared. People are afraid for one reason or the other. In my particular cultural group, when you think about the ravages of COVID and what it did at the Bethlehem Church, we had over 35 funerals. Now, you think about that because those are deacon chairmen, those are lead persons in our choir, in our mission. And then we did not have the opportunity to celebrate their lives. We did something that was, for us, countercultural. We had graveside services. And let me tell you something, it's hard to pack a 100-voice choir around a green tent with a casket in front of you. These are those real-life encounters that I believe that the local church would love to introduce to the students in the academy. You know, I think about that relationship and what that relationship should look like. I believe that it's almost a matter of holding hands, where the academic side holds the hand of the person on the practical side, where that wall that is built up and has been built up over the past century or so, where young people actually who they themselves believe and they say that they are called into ministry. However, when they enroll in seminary, for whatever reason, they are absent from the local churches. I believe that we should think about it from a practical perspective. That practical perspective would be that we utilize some of the institutional-born or even organic-born clubs and organizations that we have in our schools, and we attach them to local churches. Go Now Mission is a fine example of that. You know, it's amazing. Young people will travel the world, but right amongst us, maybe about a mile from here, 2 miles from Waco, I would say, why don't we assign you to one of the local ministry opportunities right here in town? Why don't we take care of you just like we would take care of you in Belgium, or we would take care of you in Jamaica, or we would take care of you in Haiti? Why don't we assign you to work right in the local community? And you look at it and you take the university and you put it in the middle there, and you have a 1 mile radius, a 5 mile radius, a 10 mile radius, and you say, let's go to work. Let's make that happen. And we remove the stigma that I believe that is growing up in the local churches in regard to that anti-academia, anti-intellectual, that fear that maybe some way, somehow you're going to contaminate the nice folks in the pew. I think that it's all about building relationships. I think that that's what this is about. When we come together, we talk together, we raise questions, and we work very hard to answer them. If not, we go back and we research, and then we bring back the information to you, saying to the local congregations as well as to academia, we say to them, there's no need to be afraid. No need to be afraid, because we are about the business of nurturing each other. We're about the business of growing each other. And we believe that really this is not a new thing. Because when you go back, when you think back into the history of our universities, Baylor University, Mary Hardin Simmons, you think about it, you will come to know, Hardin Simmons, you'll come to know that those institutions were founded on the belief that you will train men and women for ministry, that they would go out and that they would nurture their communities and save souls for Christ. It is not a novel idea. It's reaching back into your own heritage and discovering that there are still some diamonds in the rough, that there's rubies there, that there are treasures that can be utilized even to save our entire society. I was in a conversation earlier today, and yes, as a mayor, I find myself walking a tightrope. It's my fault. I asked for it. I ran for the office. Nobody twisted my arm. I felt a calling to do that. Dr. Cook, who is a mentor of mine, he says, sometimes I worry about whether you're taking care of yourself, but when you think about it, it's all ministry. The city of Mansfield, 75,000 residents. Our city staff has over 550 people who work for us. As the mayor, I serve as the ambassador for the city. We have a very capable city manager who does an outstanding job. So I get to be that smiling face. I get to introduce people to the way that government can really work for you and partner with you and walk alongside of you. It's something that Dr. Charles Wade said to me years ago. Michael, you are the presence of Christ to the world. I believe that's who we are. My prayer is that for some, where this may sound like orthodoxy, but God, please know that it is practical and it still works. I think there's a danger, because when we build the walls, that wall of separation between the academy and the local church, we lose a whole lot. We lose that passion that comes from the young undergrad. And then you also lose the practical side of serving, allowing yourself to be the hands and the feet of Christ. I say, in an era of political talk, of building walls, that we should be intentional about breaking down walls, breaking down those barriers between our churches and our students. Our students who think that now that I'm in my mid-50s, that I'm an old man to them. I guess I am. But helping them to understand that there's real work to do. Helping them to know that you can get your hands dirty. And boy, those endorphins, when they start popping in your brain, that good feeling that you have, you can call it a good feeling, but I call it the Holy Spirit moving. It still moves. I still believe that kind of practical education is needed. That hand-holding is needed. That nurturing is needed. We both need it. The local church needs it, and I believe that academia needs it. My oldest son is a graduate of Morehouse College. And then from there, he graduated, he matriculated in and graduated from Princeton Theological Seminary. And I said to him that when we were making our visit to Princeton, I said to him that Dad is not going to give you one dime if you do not attach yourself to a local church. That is bribery, I know. Forgive me. The pastor did sin. I did bribe him. And he connected immediately with a local church. But he never lost the common touch. So important. Where he thought that some of the things that we were doing at Bethlehem, a 152-year-old church, by the way, thought that it was quite trivial. He learned that it was all being done because we needed to minister to the people in our community. And we pride ourselves on that. What if we step back in this time, this period of the new norm, and it is that. We are forming a new norm around us. I don't care who you are, where you come from. Things are not going to go back like they were. But we recognize, though, that this isn't the first time that we found ourselves in these kind of life cycles. Why not take a global pandemic and use it to our advantage? New ways of communicating, new ways of relating. And we knit into the fabric of the church a faith walk that causes us to understand that faith without our works, it really is dead. And everything that we learn, we at some point can translate it, transfer it to the pew. Maybe then we can reinvigorate the church. And we can give to the church the fuel needed to really, it's going to sound Pollyannish, but to really save the world. I'm that naive. But I believe I'm right. And I believe that we can marry the two together. Thank you very much.
Anna.
I love this so much. I didn't know either of you until an hour ago, but I feel a little less alone in a lens on the world, so thank you, both of you. It's just a sense of shared vision and mission and sight. Should I switch mics? All right. Thank you. And I just want to echo what Michael said. Darren, you are the epitome of hospitality. I had such a lovely reception here last year, and I had not actually known of IFL, and I feel like you guys are an institutional kindred spirit, so thanks for all that you do.
Thank you so much.
So I've been asked to explore this third question, which was phrased to me as how might Christian higher education, and more particularly initiatives like this one, IFL, speak into the broader culture? And I find this like a really interesting question, like newly interesting today. And that's partly for a variety of reasons. I have been thinking kind of since COVID, and it's accelerated more recently, I've just been thinking a lot about how cultural change happens. And especially curious about the kind of hidden seed beds that lie beneath waves of what we might call like God's redemptive history rolling forth. And I've been looking at history, but I also just feel like partly because of technological advances and just kind of the proliferation of epistemological and sociological fractures we continue to see break open in our own society, and then of course all the distrust that comes along with that. This question of like, how does a society shift towards the good feels newly up for grabs. I think anyone who is like sounding very confident on how that happens, I trust them a little less. So it's just an interesting time to ask this. And on this, my little magazine, which Darren kindly mentioned is on your tables, we're probably going to be commissioning the next few issues on this question, both analytically, getting a variety of disciplines to explore it, as well as assigning reporters and historians to write narratives, looking back at history from everything from the Civil Rights Movement to the Beguines, who were these women I just learned about in the sort of early Middle Ages. Sort of these, often I would say Holy Spirit kind of sparked, organic, but also institutionally supported modes where suddenly there was a wave of lowercase c conversions towards what we would call sort of good and a part of, you could call it God's natural law, whatever. I have sat over the years on a few different advisory councils for institutes and initiatives, a little like this one, inside universities, though I myself don't have a PhD and I'm not in the academy. And most recently, one of them was the Hyde Park Institute, which Candace Vogler knows very well and has been a part of at the University of Chicago. And then another one that I'm currently helping right now is the program of leadership and character at Wake Forest University. And both of these, as well as several others, what I've noticed repeatedly is sort of hints at movement building, hints at least gesturing towards, you know, what if what a given institute or center within the broader university is trying to do is sort of pioneering or culturally feels majorly needed. How do we get the word out? How do we equip practitioners simultaneous to the research and scholastic kind of convening function? Do we provide toolkits for other institutions, sort of open source recipe books, et cetera? And I think all of this is well and good, and this sort of like sense that we could do more than just serve our own. That's a good thing. There's a lot of tumult in higher ed these days. Baylor may be less afflicted by it than other smaller schools, but maybe not. Obviously there are legitimate financial and legal fears that Christian colleges and universities in particular are facing. But I think something about that sense of existential threat, if you want to use that word, does present like a really interesting opportunity to rethink the packaging of a university's mission. Not to change the mission. If anything, I think more Christian colleges probably need to revisit their founding documents and kind of realign the veins of everyone who attends and works there. And especially the administrators and trustees, to remind them what the college was founded for. And in the Christian institution's case, I hope discipleship and friendship are always like core words in that equation. But I think there is a way to sort of, almost like a battle commander, shifting your strategy for victory. How do we maintain the mission, but as an institute inside a large university, what does it look like to be public and to be porous to the outside world? In this, I think it is important to look at history, and I am not yet positive that kind of cultural change emanates first, typically from the world of the academy, from higher ed. I think higher ed plays a pivotal role, but it's not typically like a quick catalyst. That's just partly the pace of guilds and the academic world. I love the cathedral metaphor. I think of higher ed's role in our civic life more kind of like the role of a parent in a child's life. It's gradual, deep, no shortcuts. It's non-mechanistic, but at its best, like a wonderful university education should form individuals for lives of service, leadership possibly, and if we are Christians, part of a Christian institution, I think, just love, formed to love, lived in a generous way, in a humble way, in a wise way, self-sacrificing. I have served philanthropists at a different portion of my vocation, like trying to help them to ask deeper, hopefully wiser questions of their grantees, and I do realize that long game, that formative layer of a university's mission can kind of make funders these days yawn. They're impatient. They want scale, they want expansion, hard metrics of impact, immediacy, but barring like your university shutting down, I still think it's worth sticking to your guns, kind of even at the loss of some grants. So I want to go there to formation. And I'm just going to repeat this question. How might Christian higher ed, and more particularly initiatives like IFL, speak into the broader culture? And there's lots of ways we could go about exploring this, and I'm sure we'll get into it as they integrate with the church, each of these, my interlocutors here. But I just thought I would dissect the ingredients within this question. First, what are the core assets of an institution of Christian higher ed as they touch the broader public sphere or broader culture? And I just thought of a few. You have graduates who have been formed in a particular way to ask questions of why, to integrate head, heart, and helping hand, I think uniquely, probably more often than in many secular university contexts, to put knowledge and the quest for knowledge in the service of love, to sort of understand that a great education is always a kind of science of relations, and at some level to have been discipled, or at least you've had models and faculty you've ideally had a chance to build some relationships with. And this formation is obviously happening, as you said so well, 24/7, and this alchemy of all the things that occur in a day: meals, trips to neighborhoods you never would have ordinarily visited, or countries, sports teams, classes, and how those classes, at least in a liberal arts education, kind of talk to one another in really delicious ways. Conversations at 2 a.m. in the dorm. In a Christian college context, I think lots of singing together, which is kind of a unique embodied form of union and communion. Times of loss, and how the community does or doesn't respond to that loss and being shaped by that. All these things and more I think of as almost like an aggressive car wash that's like working together on the car, namely the student, to sort of mold, complexify, strengthen, and shape. I don't know if car washes are shaping your car, but something in that metaphor. The formed graduate is probably the single most powerful cultural leaven an institution of higher ed, Christian higher ed, should never lose sight of. I think of places that have left a particularly noticeable mark. I do happen to be a Wheaton College grad, and up north, and not always, but a lot of the time, I can almost like smell a Wheatie before I know they're from Wheaton. Just the way that they talk, there's something about their like good-hearted skepticism, about easy answers, something about the way in which they create and lead in often kind of pluralist spheres. I'd say Kenyon College leaves that's not a Christian school, but a very particular identifiable mark. Davidson, I'm kind of gotten familiar with how a Davidson grad thinks about their vocation and how they fit within institutions. U Chicago, obviously, pretty identifiable. I just went to Notre Dame for the first time, and every person I've met who's ever gone there like loves that school, but they're also just all like salt of the earth, neighborly folk. 3 cheers for Midwestern Irish Catholics. Fuller Seminary, pretty identifiable. You meet people who are like very adept at cross-cultural sort of border stalking. I will say Baylor, I'm going to be honest, in my experience, in terms of the undergrads, Baylor grads, I have not seen as much a like particular mark, which may be a little bit of a reflection of some mission ambiguity or some indecisiveness at the tippy top, I don't know. But I would say, and I don't know if I'm on the record saying that, I hope I won't get overly punished for saying that, but I have noticed that Baylor attracts just this luminous, usually humanities kind of professor, and cultivated an intellectual community here amongst the faculty that I think anyone who's an honest scholar would love to be a part of. I'm jealous of it. I wish I could be in your seminars and lunchrooms all day. Formed graduates do many, hopefully, good things in the world, well-formed graduates. But one of the things that's kind of interesting that I've noticed as I've studied what makes for a truly formative institution inside and outside the university setting is if you've experienced culture here that has been uniquely beautiful, you've felt your agency empowered, you've been able to struggle through things and have those struggles occur in a context of psychological safety and accountability. You kind of know your role towards a mission, all those wonderful traits of being part of a like shalom, in a sense, in a community or an institution. Typically, when they leave that kind of place, if they go into a police department or a healthcare facility or Congress or a magazine, another educational institution, they'll often be equipped in ways they cannot articulate, but they will be equipped to transmit the same healthy culture they absorbed in the college in this next sector. And I just find that fascinating. I call that generativity, but that's a powerful thing. Another asset of Christian higher ed, I think just the friendships and networks of friendships formed by such thick places that follow you over a lifetime. I spent some time earlier this year, and I think there may be a few people here from there, Valparaiso, which had a big influence on me as a young person. They used to publish these anthologies, I think thanks to Lily Valparaiso, maybe a little UChicago influence. That was just helping young people, like a 20-something, figure out what to do with their lives. And there's something about those essays that had a big impact. So I'd been curious about Valparaiso, and I went and I got to know the Mark Schwain, who was recently retired but was part of Christ College. I think I might be looking at a Valpo person. And he was telling me all about this freshman production that he started. And basically what they do is they invite freshmen of the Honors College to create a musical over the course of their first year, where they'll have read Machiavelli's The Prince, or Plato's Republic, or Dante's Inferno, or Thucydides, or whatever. And that year, they're just like thrown together, a motley crew, and they have to figure out how to choreograph, how to create songs, to apply these texts maybe to the current challenges of the day. And as he told me, he was like, every year, 90 adolescent strangers learn to discover one another's gifts, to celebrate the diversity of such gifts, to rely on one another, and to quickly discern that the excellence of the final performance depends on such diversity. One freak year, almost all of the musicians in the class were trombonists, which led to both special challenges and special opportunities for the composers. This process of collective discovery teaches the value of diversity far more effectively than a few lectures could. Moreover, during the semester, students are graded on a pass-fail basis. Cooperation is the essence of healthy moral communities, and competition is often inimical to them. And I just think about that, and I'm imagining like both the friendships, memories, and kind of shared journeys of discovering one's own role and agency. Do you have leadership gifts? Are you more a group? You know, all those kinds of traits of our personalities. And how they are now in future institutions, like the alums of that program, what they learned in that drama. There's something really neat about that, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're quite innovative wherever they are serving vocationally. I think about the friendships I made at Wheaton, which now is about 20 years ago, but I think something about being forged at a somewhat particular, quirky place have just been instrumental in sometimes defending work that I haven't quite known how to do in public, but also giving me courage to approach topics as the editor of a magazine that may be so human, they're like not sexy, but they're, so I think they're just the role of those friendships formed in a place is just a lifelong gift. I think, IFL, but also a broader university like this, Christian schools, ideally there is some level of contemporary, institutional witness to the surrounding area. I would love to talk to you later, Michael, about those connective tissue between the academy and the local church. I have not seen this too much with Christian colleges. I find it much more amongst K through 12 faith-based schools that I think involve parents and more of that village where you really see the impact of a younger school community that's probably more holistic in the sense of who all it's involving age-wise. And the vocational roles, I'm thinking of the Oaks Academy in Indianapolis, I could probably name 10 more examples, than colleges. But I think, the best way often I have found, I live in DC and I get to interact with journalists and public intellectuals who are very secular and proudly so, but they'll say, I love Notre Dame, or I was invited to speak at a Wheaton, or I was invited to speak at Baylor, and I've never experienced such free inquiry, and I've never experienced such kind of robust quest and debate after things that feel like much more tentative to be able to discuss on CNN or at Yale or whatever. So that's interesting to me. I think the sort of bullishness to just be open and welcome the stranger, so to speak, is a way to sort of have a present institutional witness, not just one that's going to impact students. The public reputation established by graduates or professors. I was in high school when this is not a political statement, but in our English class, the first inaugural address of Bush, so whenever this was, pre-9/11, and we dissected it, and I was going to this very aggressively secular progressive school. I was a brand new Christian in this context, and I remember we're reading this text, and all my classmates and the teachers, they're like, we're moving to Canada. This is like faith and the church and the state are being married. This is horrible. And I remember sitting there being like, I don't know if I'm what I think, but I just have never read such moral fluency in public life. I'm really interested in who wrote this speech. Oh, a man named Michael Gerson. Oh, he went to a school called Wheaton. That's really interesting. And then, Esau McCauley, Mark Knoll, Alan Jacobs here, these are serious people who are taken seriously by the wider world. I would say they tend to issue the label evangelical if that is how they could be labeled, but they're out there and they get a hearing. And then relatedly, and this is a little red carpet for the real gift of today, which is tonight's lecture, ideally you have Christian institutions have top-notch scholarship in every domain of the sciences and the humanities that is getting out there and has a unique fragrance as humanly, honestly sought, but sort of Christianly enlightened. Candace Vogler is a total exemplar in this way. I joked to my husband when I saw who was giving the real lecture tonight. I was like, I feel like I get to be the opening act for the Bruce Springsteen of philosophy. This is just amazing. And she's a woman who's fluent in Aquinas. Mary Hirschfeld of economics, you were talking about her earlier, Lydia Dugdale. And it's not just the way they comport themselves as scholars on the academic battlefield, which is really important, but it's what they introduce as kind of the underlying wisdom around issues of human anthropology and the nature of democracy and our interior freedom and agency, the civic containers needed for things like atonement for major national sins in our history and forgiveness. And I think just a constant pressing down into the intrinsic goods of human life, pushing back against sort of our culture's obsession with just extrinsic goods. And I'll wrap up here by saying, in terms of speaking into the broader culture, there's a lot there. I don't always love that phrase, to speak into, because I don't know who the audience is meant to be. I don't think the broader culture is asking to be spoken into, at least not consciously. They're not lining up for tickets for us to hear us speak. I think the most important speaking into occurs when you're a student in one of these institutions and you're surrounded by people who are looking as rigorously as possible at the deep trends of the day and teaching you how to think Christianly about them. I probably prefer the word, how do you reach? How does Christian ed reach the broader culture? Especially at a time when people are suspicious of certainly label like evangelical or label even Christian, I think. And just a few suggestions. I think we do need to equip students to have, actually like what you were saying, Michael, encourage students to have a hybrid experience during their course of study. And what I mean by that is not virtual classroom, but to be like reading the deep text, having these seminar dialectic conversations, but then encouraging them to teach ESL on the other side of town in an immigrant community, or get involved in some sort of urban ministry, or apprentice yourself at a local church. I think those experiences of culture friction between your study and where you are in this sort of Christian bubble and the grittier parts of the real world, whether they're actually elite. I was at Wheaton, but I took a semester off. I don't usually talk about this, but I spent a semester at Harvard just to test this integration of faith and learning. Would it work there? And it was really hard, but I'm grateful for that kind of smash a little bit culturally that was occurring simultaneously, that kind of introduced me to real life that could not exist on simple platitudes that can sometimes happen if you're in a purely Christian context. Equipping students to be truly excellent always gets you in the door. I think equipping and encouraging faculty and giving faculty time to write, not just for the academic guild and the journal, but more mainstream publications, whether it's the small magazine world that I inhabit at Comment, or places like The Atlantic or Hedgehog Review or The New Atlantis or Harper's or The Point. These magazines still really have currency in our public life. I'm so thankful that magazines haven't gone away and do drive conversations that reach consequential decision makers. And I feel like sometimes universities are sitting on this gold mine of IQ and expertise that is stuck inside. Having a real emphasis on how to hear the human pain out there right now, and how can our various disciplines respond to it. I think start with the pain. Christians have a unique both ability and I think spiritual endowment to be able to run to it, paired with tools that come from all the liberal arts. And then this is the final thing I'll say. I'm sorry, I've gone on a little long, Darren. I think about this institute in particular, just the power of beautiful, discerning curation and convening. And a little in tune, and you probably already do this, but welcoming in a few more outsiders who would be really intrigued. I think about Jonathan Haidt would probably love to come here and experience this. Alan Lightman of MIT. I just had a really cool opportunity to meet and interview Oscar Eustis, who runs the Public Theater in New York and is the producer who found Hamilton. And he's like a real humanist and is an atheist, but I think if he understood the loves that are being educated here, people like that, there's something about that kind of convening. The convening I'm really interested in these days is I've been inspired by this group called Oldham's Moot, which some of you may know. It's underknown in the U.S., but it was a network of thinkers and civic leaders that met regularly between 1937 and 1949 in England, although they were coming from all over Europe. It was like T.S. Eliot and Reinhold Niebuhr and Karl Mannheim, who was a German sociologist, Jewish refugee, gotten over to the UK in time, and about 30 others, and it was the 30s, 40s, I think it was all male. They were predominantly Christian, but not exclusively so. They had a variety of commitments, ecclesiastical and political, but no one party line. Their associations were kind of informal. Out of a group of about 40 people in different walks of life, any number of them would have contact with a number of others, and some with many. And they would gather regularly, often through great hardship as the war was beginning, and logistical complexity, to gather and to just talk about how do we rebuild a better normal? How do we rebuild a better society after the war? Physicists, poets, literature professors, people in government. And they would interrogate, like, how do we relate faith to society? How do we understand Christianity's role in this time of war and eventual social reconstruction? Kind of the crisis of modernity as a disintegrating force, the dynamics introduced by deepening secularization, nationalisms, and dignity-defying totalisms that were obviously wrapped up then toxically with race and strongmen through Hitler. And what was the point and purpose of human life in all of this, and specifically the role of higher ed in developing a capacity to think seriously about the timeless questions that mark our humanity? Alan Jacobs writes about them a little bit in his book, The Year of Our Lord, 1943. And the convener, Oldham, but this could also be IFL, would sort of spot what he deemed to be the most urgent problems facing human society that Christians in particular, to both these gentlemen's point, had like deep riches from which to draw from to address, not solve, but shed some light on. There weren't quick fixes. I think they understood that our lives are too complicated to be like reordered in some mechanistic way. But physicist Michael Polanyi was like, these conversations changed our lives. And one person who was involved said, unless this group had met, and unless the questions we asked about human purposes and the circumstances of human flourishing, unless those things are raised, society will lose any sense of a transcendent and will become criterionless and prey to either managerial control or, more sinisterly, the blandishment of ideologies which claim to have the answer to human purposes in terms that liberal societies are in danger of not addressing. And I just think there's an opportunity right now. There's so many, obviously, issues that Christians are associated with in public that are captured by the culture war. But there's other issues that are never touched, like the carceral state and migration to some degree, patterns all over the world, and food and agriculture and supply chains, hospice and end-of-life care, structures of care. And I think it would be really interesting to just sort of almost run some interdisciplinary working groups, ideally with an artist in there, some practitioners in there, 8 to 12 each, that are just like looking at issues of pressing concern and bringing that Christian humanist flavor. And I think whether I fell in partnership with others, but I'm very interested in that kind of work, because I think there needs to be some focused attention that reaches the broader public sphere. So there's my manual for you, Darren.
I was going to say, I got my assignment. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ann. We want to have a conversation with you all. I wondered if, before we do that, in hearing one another, were there any things that you want to talk to or react to that you've heard from the others on the panel that you'd like to bring up? Michael?
Sure. I appreciate hearing the verbiage in regard to hybrid, and I think that is the kind of model that I'm definitely wanting to really highlight, where that hybrid needs to, I think, almost be baked into our curriculum, baked into what we get to do as undergraduates or even either graduate students. Also, you talked a bit about the social reconstruction. I believe that we are in that phase again, where it was then, of course, it was after the world wars, but now it's after a global pandemic, and we are there. I think that it's almost just rewired our brains when you think about it. We act different. We are having to learn again how to socialize, and I think that's real, and I believe that we see a lot of that. It's pent up, and now we're experiencing where it's bursting out just like steam in a pipe, and we see it played out in our daily lives. We're seeing it played out in our politics and even in our churches, as it concerns the way that we even do church or attempt to redefine exactly what that means. And I just believe that now is a good time for us to take those bricks and to start building and building again, that cathedral that I think has definitely has been injured now. I really do. And some of those bricks are now missing, and we're called upon to replace them, but with a new mindset.
Any other comments? Tom?
As I was coming over here, first of all, a shout out to Notre Dame. I went to Notre Dame, and my favorite Notre Dame joke is if somebody went to Notre Dame, how do you know? They tell you, which I just did. But as I was getting ready to come down here this week, I noticed that Catholic University students are taking a service trip to Waco. But we're not in the local community. Our service trips aren't going to some of the distressed areas in D.C. So it was an interesting moment when you said, what are these institutions doing for the communities in which they live and work? That's a real challenge. The relationship between church and institution shows up very differently at Catholic University because it was founded by the United States bishops, and I guess the camera is on. I would say it's difficult to think about how to work with the hierarchical church. I think it's more straightforward and a great challenge to work with the local churches on the ground of whatever flavor. So that's a challenge that I'm going to take back to my community, and I appreciate it.
We invite you all to pose questions or comments or just engage in the conversation. And if you'd like to, if you just stand, and we're going to get you a mic that works. How about mine?
Hello, I'm Megan, and thank you three so much. This was just fabulous. I couldn't help but keep thinking, there's a recurring theme that I keep hearing about being good, and just the simplicity of that. It's not you have to just go above and beyond, but just to do good. And number one, that's reassuring to me, and number two, just to teach our students that to model that as faculty, that it's very simple, and then to teach them that it's very simple. My question for you three is, do you see, and I know we're talking about higher ed here, but the K through 12 population that, in a perfect world, if everyone started earlier and did better and taught good, I don't know how to say that, do we think that this would be easier here in higher ed? And what would that look like? And these are adults that we have here in higher education. Do we get parental involvement involved? Or what does that look like? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. You know, we all operate out of our filters. By that I mean, whatever experiences we've had, K through 12, highs and lows of life, we operate out of those filters. We interact with people based upon the things that we were taught at the kitchen table. I think that it's quite difficult if I were to think that I could have a student, an individual, for 4 years where mom, dad, their neighborhood, their culture, their family has had them 17, 18 years, thinking that I'm going to reshape their lives. I do think that what we are able to do is to, and all of us, we model, as we talk about what is good, and we determine what we think is good based upon our areas of commonality. Mansfield, for example, is 60% white. And our culture, our history is a dark history in regard to Mansfield, Texas, the way that it was. So I get the opportunity to work with people from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and also the Gen Z now, that group that, that's wondering why are we so uptight, about CRT that we don't even teach in our local schools, or why is that even an issue when we're talking about gender issues, these kinds of things. It's the encounters that we have, I believe, that shape us, and the actual doing of the work, whatever that might be, and what it feels like to do that and to do good and to pour into other people's lives, but also understanding at the same time that they're pouring into you, and that influences who you are and maybe who you will become from those adult years forward. That would be my answer.
Yeah, and thanks for the question. As a father and as a teacher, I'm always struck by how perceptive my children and students are about my own flaws, how much they see, how carefully they pay attention, and it's a goad. And I think in some fundamental way, of course, that early formation is vital in the family and in the school. But one of the things that I miss in this culture is a sense of forgiveness, the sense that everybody falls down and we need to help pick each other up and move on, and rituals where people encounter each other, apologize genuinely, and genuinely forgive. I read Anna Karenina a couple times over COVID, and there's this famous opening line, I'm not going to get this exactly right, all happy families are happy in the same way, all unhappy families are different in their unhappiness. And the second time I read it in the last couple years, I thought, oh, this is about forgiveness. Actually, Anna Karenina, the unhappy families are unhappy in different ways, but the happy families all forgive each other. And that is the path they take to kind of a flourishing life, because they all fall down, but they pick themselves up and forgive. And the families that are unhappy in their different ways refuse to do that. And that's why they wind up being not good. And what I see in the young is a deep hunger for righteousness and goodness. But I don't see as much, which is laudable, but I don't see as much this kind of recognition of self-limits and sin, frankly, and an eagerness to embrace forgiveness.
Richard.
Thanks for all your talks. I have a question on the stone rolling metaphor, which Thomas Smith and the center used, but I think everybody sort of was eager to engage it. So surely one of the attractions of ideology, especially to the young, is that it gives you a sense of a larger purpose. I love the idea of teaching students they're not just rolling stones through mud, they're trying to build a cathedral. But how do you give them that sense when there's no agreement about what we are building or what we ought to be building?
That's a great question. You know, as Ann was talking about culture, changing culture means changing patterns of language, and it means changing patterns of practice. And this is the fundamental problem today. We don't have regular rhythms of common practice, and we don't have common speech. And I think part of the challenge around kind of policing of speech on campus is precisely this fear that because language is so slippery and can be used to bad effects, we need to kind of lock it down. And what I see among young people is really profound struggles with trying to talk in a compelling, real way about the fundamentals of their lives, struggles with suffering, dating, falling in love, friendship. They don't have a language to wrestle with that. I mean, I can tell you what I'm doing, which is I've created these adulting programs at both Villanova, where I used to work, and Catholic, where I work now. And what we try to do is we create these co-curricular experiences at different inflection points in their development. So walking over the threshold from high school to college, we have a freshman program. And we read things with them, and we talk, and we engage in activities all about what does it mean to be a successful college student. And it's nuts and bolts like studying and test anxiety and those things, but also larger questions about what it means to be an intellectual. And then there's a second course that has something to do with work in sophomore year when they have to pick a major. And it's again, nuts and bolts. You have to interview, you have to put together a resume, you have to pick out an internship and so on, but it's also what you could call skills of discernment. What are my gifts, and how do I connect my gifts with a vocation? What's meaningful work? What are the guardrails around work? And then a senior course about what should life look like in the 20s? How's your family of origin going to look? What's your leisure time look like? How do you pay attention today? This is a really critical thing for young people. How do you put your phone aside and do things for their own sake? What we used to call leisure. There's no substitute for accompanying people in those journeys. And what I find is if you ask them real questions and you help them struggle with reaching out for a common language and a common set of practices, they'll do it. They're game for it. You can overcome their fear if you sort of work up slowly to it. I just don't think there's any substitute for kind of disarming yourself and engaging them in a conversation and knowing that you're kind of shoulder to shoulder with them as they search for this common language and set of purposes.
Well, we have a reception for you all, and so those of you who can stay and spend time with our guests, and I've noticed this has been a little bit of a reunion for some of my colleagues. People have gotten to see one another, and they haven't been able to see one another for a while, and so that's a wonderful thing, and that's one of the gifts of convening. Please join me in thanking a panel that has given lots of wisdom and lots of charity, Michael Evans, Tom Smith, and Ann Snyder.